Let's go to you first, Jane, Lucy, if we may, founder of Labrador. We've seen these energy bosses grilled this morning by MPs, but it is pretty much hot air, isn't it? We're none the wiser where much-needed assistance for households opening these often eye-watering fuel bills, wondering how they're going to pay. Who's going to help them?
Well, I think it's there's a number of different ways that there can be savings unlocked for consumers. And I mean, we've heard today that, for instance, the Bulb CEO has been continuing to pay himself a £250,000 salary even after the special administration at a cost to taxpayers. Avro CEO paying himself in excess of £500,000 salary. And as you mentioned earlier, the fact that we've still got environmental costs added to electricity bills where perhaps there's an argument that they would be better placed on gas. So there's lots of different complexities involved. But I think fundamentally we're here today because of a combination of factors, namely price and availability of energy in the wholesale market and Ofgem regulation forcing suppliers to operate at a loss, and also failing to ensure suppliers are sufficiently financially robust and acting to protect customers. So when you look at those three key drivers, I think the talk about Ofgem regulating more has to be the wrong suggestion, because you've got a history of Ofgem intervening and creating unintended adverse consequences, which is exactly what we're seeing here today.
Tony Lodge, you're from the Centre for Policy Studies. That's a very well-connected think tank in the heart of Westminster. You guys speak to lots of ministers, trying to work out what's going on, chivying them along, trying to shape their thinking. We're seeing now signs that they may scrap these renewable subsidies, which bump up our energy, our electricity bills at least, by 25%. Surely it's time to do that now.
It is time to do that, but there's also a recognition that this is 40 years of hurt finally rearing its head. Bad policy making, right since before privatisation, when we got rid of the old CEGB, privatised the electricity, privatised the networks. We haven't gone down the route of planning for major, big, robust, resilient plant to take over, closing coal-fired power stations. We had the dash for gas. The long-term planning has been totally removed from this whole sector for far too long. If I told you, Liam, Edward Heath was told in 1972 to go for nuclear. Follow the lesson of the French.
The Prime Minister, yeah.
Then the Prime Minister in 72, who was fighting a battle with the coal unions. Margaret Thatcher was told in 79, go for nuclear, build 10 reactors. She didn't, she built one. Then Blair drops nuclear. We're now, according to Rolls-Royce this morning, going to go very fast for small modular nuclear reactors.
They'll take till 2028, 2030, right?
2030.
Even with government help.
So government needs to accept and find itself in a situation where it is straight with the British people. Attacking CEOs and the rest is absurd and nonsense.
£250,000 he's still paying himself?
Indeed, indeed. But is that going to actually bring down fuel poverty levels? I'm not defending that at the moment, but the big picture here is that we've got into a situation where our exposure to factors which the British government can do very little about, whether it is... Don't forget, renewables enjoy a rising carbon price. That is in their interests. So renewables are enjoying a circumstance at the moment which is to their benefit. Environmental levies, yes, should go, but there has to be a straight bat from government to the consumer. There is a situation here where parties of all colours have not been straight with you and have not been taking decisions of the national interest.
Funny you mentioned nuclear, Tony, because I'm delighted we can be joined now by Wade Allison, who's been on the money before. He is an Oxford University professor, a world-class authority in the area of nuclear energy. Wade, thank you so much for joining us here on The Money. It's great to have you on the show. What do you think? You've been knocking around the energy debate for so long, if I may say so, and now people are realising that perhaps we need to go for nuclear like the French have. 70% of their energy is nuclear. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we should have started this a long time ago, as has already been said. I think people have got to be honest with the British people. This is not about money. You can't heat yourself or run industry on money. What we've got to do is to stop telling people that offshore wind, for instance, is going to provide the answer. I don't know whether I'm allowed to share my screen here. Does that share? No.
Right, Professor Allison.
Hello?
Why don't you think offshore wind will help us, Professor Allison?
Let me tell you, at the end of March, from the 21st to the 28th of March, this government statistics, offshore wind, which were totally so marvellous, was actually running at about 15% of nominal. This country cannot run for a week on 15% of its major power input. So offshore wind, forget it. It's a little thing on the side. Onshore wind is even worse. What we need is big nuclear power stations now. Not very adventurous, but at least they can be rolled out more quickly from Rolls-Royce. And then in 15 years' time, we're going to need small modular reactors, little ones in each city or group of cities, which people can identify with and give them the energy that they need and the confidence that they need. Because what industry needs and people need is confidence.
Professor Allison, before I bring the other panellists in, I just want to ask you, do you sense that nuclear is becoming a bit more acceptable to mainstream opinion, to the environmental lobby? Isn't it a lot less demonised now than it was even a year ago? Because that's my sense.
Yeah, I agree with you, but when we're talking about a 25-year timeline and a 25-year failure, 1 year we've got... I'm afraid we're going to have to get very frightened and of a really frightening situation, and the public are going to have to understand what is at stake here.
Do you think the public understands what's at stake? Jane, Lucy, you're at the front line. You're helping individual households every day trying to cope with these eye-watering bills.
I do, because they're being charged an awful lot of money. It's pretty hard to ignore that when you're struggling to make ends meet. And, unfortunately for some people, energy is such a basic necessity, it can be life or death, in terms of staying warm and cooking food and keeping food fresh. So I think consumers are very, very aware of what's going on. And I think what the problem is that they're not very aware of what help is out there to help them navigate this, and certainly, not confident that enough is being done to start introducing change.
What do you make of this, Justin?
Do you remember 2 weeks ago we were talking about the economic statement, and the one thing they missed, the key issue that was coming up in everybody's minds? What are you going to do about it?
Mention it?
Not at all. And so now actually the government's getting it smack in the face, because this was what was going to happen. This was coming through. You could have actually just announced this beforehand. Meanwhile, you've got Ofsod, or whatever the regulator's called.
Off-gem for family purposes.
Achieving absolute. They produce a lot of hot air themselves, but they missed the fact in terms of the producers they're bringing, in terms of the the retailers that's coming, who had no experience, no understanding what was going on, and not regulated, and also didn't have to pay the green levy either. That was just irresponsible, amateur stuff.
Ministers are now hearing from the energy bosses, not us, Gov, we can't help people in this tough situation. It falls to ministers, it falls to the government. What have ministers got in the tank, so to speak, to help cash-strapped households?
Liam, one of the most informative bits this morning, which I did watch the session, was Scottish Power, who said the key word here is actually planning. Where is the speed in the planning system to get the new plant, the new baseload plant, as we used to call it, up and running? Why hasn't energy policy got the same priority behind it as we had with beating COVID? That legislation should have the same priority as COVID.
Because as many lives are at stake, right?
Well, there are.
As we go into winter.
Something which must not be ignored is energy-intensive industry. The big steel makers, fertiliser, chemicals, heavy manufacturers, they are hurting too.
A lot of them in red wall seats.
Absolutely.
Tories have to hang on to.
They are hurting too, and there are some extraordinary numbers where steel makers, for example, are paying 60% more for energy than they are on the continent.
Yeah,
These
unbelievable.
are major issues.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.